wanted to just touch on a couple things that you mentioned earlier. One was somebody questioning how you could get enough calcium if you didn't drink dairy. And
Yeah,
I'm sure the same question, and I'd like you to also answer the same question about protein if you don't
sure.
eat meat, because even though we address it almost every show here, I think
Yeah,
it needs to be addressed because there's such a
right,
resistance to
right, right.
hearing.
Well, at a very kind of fundamental level, I ask a simple question. When I get that question, I ask a simple question back. I ask athletes or patients, I said, let me ask you, the last time you turned on National Geographic and you saw a special on mountain gorillas or elephants, what's the first thing that popped in your mind? Oh my God, where do they get their protein? Right? Of course not. It's some of the biggest, strongest animals on earth. And what do they eat? I mean, they eat plants. So this mythology that we got to eat meat to get protein is just not true, right? And people are like, well, I never thought of it that way. And then I kind of point out that so you want some protein, so you're going to eat a big steak. Where did that protein come from? Right? Well, it came from the cow. Okay, well, where did the cow get the protein from? Well, from the grass. So because we're not starved for calories, we have the luxury of skipping the middleman because the cow has already used all the good stuff, right? Used all the fiber and the vitamins and nutrients to run its own machine, and they just leave us with protein and fat. Why don't we go straight to the source and provide ourselves with complete nutrition, the nutrient-dense foods that the cow ate or the elephant ate or the gorilla ate to fuel themselves? So why do we have to skip, why do we skip the middleman? So, and then if they're still resistant, you can get into the math. I mean, if you look at the RDA for protein, it's about 0.8 grams per kilogram. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the natural macronutrient ratios of a plant-based diet are 75% carbs, 15% protein, about 10% fat. So if you do the math backwards, so your average size, you're eating your kind of average activity, you're eating 1,800 calories a day. The amount of protein that provides is right at 0.8 grams per kilogram, right? But say you're training for a marathon, right? I mean, you're not eating 1,800 calories. You might be eating 3,200 calories, 3,600 calories. Well, guess what's happened to your protein intake in that situation? It's doubled to 1.6, right?
Because you're eating twice as many calories.
Exactly. And the research would show that an endurance athlete needs between 1.2 and about 1.6 grams per kilogram. You're a strength-trained athlete, you might need a little closer to 2, but guess what? You're a professional bodybuilder, you're eating 3,000 or 4,000 calories a day. So you're going to get all the protein you need. It's not protein you worry about, it's calories, right? And if you get enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. And I have a little calculator that I share with patients. I have a spreadsheet I made with calculators. So I'll sit them down and walk them through what that looks like. And they're like, wow, okay, I never thought of that. I didn't know that. And also educating them about there are adverse effects of the overconsumption of protein. We know that, we can store extra fat, we can store extra carbohydrate, we can't store extra protein. And whatever protein, after we've used up the protein, after we've used the protein we need to repair our muscles or build muscle, repair our tissue, kind of day-to-day maintenance, that gets converted to nitrogen and excreted in our kidneys. So we know that excess protein intake puts a strain on our kidneys, has been associated over the long term with kidney disease. Most of the animal-based protein sources that we consume have high levels of IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, especially in dairy products. Because remember, milk is a biologic fluid that's designed to take a baby mammal and turn it into a mammal big enough to go find food on its own. And each species' milk is designed to meet that species' needs. So cow's milk takes 70-pound cows and turns them into 500 or 600-pound cows before they can go find food on their own. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of protein and sugar and growth factors to do that. And we know that the overconsumption of IGF-1, particularly in dairy products, has been associated with an increased risk for cancer, heart disease, because it is an anabolic compound.
And what does that mean, an anabolic compound?
Oh, it builds muscle. It promotes tissue growth.
Got it.
So, the problem is you don't want to, when you over-promote tissue growth, it turns into cancer, right? So that's the problem.
And what about calcium? What do you say to folks who say?
Well, it's the same thing. Where did the calcium come from in the milk? Well, it came from the grass that they actually came from the dirt, right? So it's the same issue. There's as much calcium in a cup of collard greens as there is in a cup of milk. right? And, tofu is coagulated soy milk. It's soybean curds. How do you coagulate it? With calcium carbonate, which is gypsum. So there's high levels of calcium in tofu. So we do need calcium for strong bones, but you don't need to get that from milk. And there's some evidence that you look at population data. Countries with the highest amount of dairy consumption have the highest rates of osteoporosis. And in theory, when we consume protein, we break down the protein. Protein's made up of amino acids, and those are the proteins broken down in our digestive tract. And what we actually absorb are these amino acids. Some amino acids, especially the ones that have sulfur on them, are more acidic than others. When we overconsume protein in general and milk specifically because it has a higher level of these sulfated amino acids, it lowers the pH of our blood, and our bodies really do a great job maintaining a very narrow pH range. And so when we over-acidify our blood, we have to neutralize that acid. Now, before they had the little purple pill, if you had heartburn, what would you take? Well, you take Tums, right? So Tums is calcium carbonate. So when we want to de-acidify our blood or offset that acid, what do? Well, we need calcium. Where does it come from? It comes from our bones. And so that's one of the theories about why the overconsumption of dairy products in particular, but protein in general, can lead to higher rates of osteoporosis.
Yeah. There's I think a question out there that is just kind of runs congruent all the time with drinking cow's milk as humans. And I think most people can conceptualize and understand that, okay, yeah, we are the only species that drinks the mother's milk of another species as adults. Like that just, okay, yeah, that doesn't make much sense. I still like it, but you'd still have to convince me otherwise, but that doesn't make sense. But what does make sense to mothers, it made sense to my mother, I think it made sense to your mother, is that after they wean their babies off of their milk, it makes sense for them to just have another milk because they were having milk. But what is so dangerous about cow's milk is something that you just touched on, is the speed and the rate of growth of the baby cow versus our rate of growth, which is really quite slow. And the amount of protein, casein and whey, specifically casein, in a liter of cow's milk is about 26 grams. It's about 3 grams in a human mother's milk. So that just kind of shows you that difference there. So why is it specifically not good for 3-year-old baby Johnny to be having cow's milk?
Right. Well, you look at, if you read the book, The China Study by T. Colin Campbell, which has addresses this casein issue very specifically. We know that casein, again, it appears to have almost a carcinogenic anabolic effect, which can contribute to cancer. And to your point, we had to domesticate. We did the only milk we had access to for hundreds of thousands of years was our mother's milk, and we had to domesticate other mammals to get access to their milk. And that didn't occur till 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. That's a blink of an eye in our evolutionary heritage. So for all of human existence, except for this last little few, seconds on our evolutionary timeline, we didn't even have access to other mammals' milk, right? And so it just doesn't make sense to me that we are not designed to use dairy. I mean, look at the enzyme that digests milk sugar, lactase. That gene that makes lactase is designed to turn off around age 4 or 5 because historically that's when we would wean around that age. And if you look at the world population today, that's exactly what happens. 75% of the world population today becomes lactose intolerant around age 4 or 5. Now, sometimes that it can manifest a little bit later in life. So, I see patients all the time who come in and they've got, they're bloating and they've got diarrhea and they got gas all the time. They can't, they go on a gluten-free diet because they figure that's what's going on because that's what, that's the kind of the health fad of the day. But it turns out they're lactose intolerant because we're not designed to drink milk. The only reason that a small population, it's mainly Caucasians, it's about 20%, 25% of the population today, the only reason that a very small percentage can still even digest milk sugar into later life is that there was a genetic mutation at around the time we domesticated other mammals was at the end of the last ice age. And so it was harder to find plant-based proteins because of climate change. And so there was a mutation in a population of people that caused lactase persistence and allowed that small group to continue to digest milk sugar because of the survival advantage it provided. That gene got passed into a small part of the population. So, I mean, again, you look at the evolution, kind of the anthropologic evidence. You look at the scientific evidence. I mean, across the board, there are the only studies that show that there's a benefit to drinking dairy are the studies funded by the dairy industry, right? Which is a huge issue when we try to kind of tease all this stuff out. But I think if you look objectively across the whole body of evidence, you look at again at the anthropologic evidence, the scientific evidence around health. You start looking at the environment, the effect that dairy cows have on the environment. There's absolutely no reason that human beings should be drinking cow's milk in general, and specifically, or any other mammal's milk for that matter.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.